Great. Thanks again for having us. Came here from New York, so it's fun to be in Milan and get to meet some members of the Milan startup scene. My name is Matthew Breimer. I'm co-founder of General Assembly. This is my co-founder, Brad Hargraves. We're going to talk a little bit
Sentite
about...
in fondo? No. You should probably raise your voice a little bit.
Sure. We're going to talk a little bit about packaging your idea, talk about messaging, talk about value proposition, branding, et cetera. And we're going to share a few stories along the way. First, to explain a little bit about what General Assembly is. General Assembly is an educational campus focused on technology, design, and entrepreneurship with a community of practitioners at the core. We started the company about a year and a half ago, really seeing a need in New York especially for a sort of hub or nucleus or an ecosystem really to help bring the startup community together in a meaningful way. And when we began, we didn't exactly know what General Assembly was or what it was going to be. We knew that we wanted a physical place. We knew that we wanted to create something that could have people coming together to learn, to work, to inspire each other, to meet each other, to share feedback, to share ideas. And when we got started, we really felt that that New York at the time was seeing a real crescendo in terms of people becoming inspired by the entrepreneurial experience, leaving their traditional jobs, and moving into the technology sector and building companies that were technology infused. One of our sort of core ideas was that technology and digital and the internet was not this thing that was just sort of its own industry, but it was really an important part of really any consumer-facing industry out there. Whether it's fashion or film or art or media or advertising or journalism or publishing, technology is becoming a more and more important part of those industries and those sectors. So we wanted to bring people together and create educational programs that could really train people in these skills for the new economy, skills for the 21st century where technology was an increasingly important part of these different industries. And as new jobs sort of came up and as there are more growth areas in these new sectors, we needed to find a way to train new talent. And so what we're doing now is producing educational programs, training people for these new jobs and for these new economies, and really providing the resources and community to allow that to happen, both in a sort of direct and structured way and also in a serendipitous way. So we'll get into more of that later, but I wanted to sort of share some of our learnings and some of the ways that we think about what we do and how we express it. Brad and I have been starting companies for a number of years now, so we'll share some of those lessons learned. So he can rewind the clock a little bit and talk about some of our experiences from our last company.
Cool. Yep. Thanks, Matt. First of all, can everyone hear me? Awesome. So we were invited to talk a little bit about packaging your idea here. Now, packaging your idea, unlike, say, building your team, is not a very concrete topic. And there are a lot of ways you could go there. So I think the best way to talk about, say, telling the story of your venture, about narrative, is to start with some of our own narratives. So I want to talk a little bit about our first company, which was a gaming startup called Go Cross Campus. We started with the idea, and we were college students when we started this, with the idea that anyone who is in college, for instance, would rather play an online game against someone from a rival school or a rival city or something like that than a random person on the internet. And we actually, because we started getting some user traction, some people started liking this concept, we raised venture money as about halfway through college. And we also did that because we had no idea what we were doing, and all this wonderful stuff about lean methodology and things like that didn't really exist at the time, and if it did, we certainly didn't know about it. So how were we able to get user traction on this kind of crazy concept? When we were, I was a second year, he was a second year, I was a third year in college. Well, we really knew how to tell the story of what we were doing to our users. That's one thing we did well. We did a lot wrong. We actually did almost everything wrong. But that was one thing we did well. And the reason we were able to do that is because we were the users. We were students in college who wanted to play online games against other students in college. So that was easy to do. And we could tell a great story. And when I say telling stories, what do I mean? I don't really mean what I'm doing here, standing up in front of you, lecturing. I mean designing the first page of the website. I mean when someone comes to your site, when they interact with your product, they have typically 3 to 5 seconds at most to decide whether they want to keep engaging or not. And in those 3 to 5 seconds, can you tell them, in our case, why you want to play? Well, first of all, what this is, why you want to play, and whether your friends are playing. It's a big question. So because we were college students, we were able to convince people that, hey, it's social, it's a lot user-generated, it's based on rivalries, and people played. And within a few months after launching, we had over 100,000 users, and we're the largest college gaming network in the US. But that was easy, because we were telling the story to ourselves, basically. Unfortunately, life really isn't like that. Or fortunately, I guess. You don't just have to tell the story to yourself. You're not just interacting with yourself throughout life. You have to overcome age gaps. You have to overcome experience, different backgrounds, and sometimes you require live translation. We didn't really understand that. And that's ultimately why that company failed, is we had one story that was geared toward college students. And on the flip side, we were hoping to sell advertising into large brands. And when we tried to do that, we failed. Because we would go to them with the same story that we would take to college students, where social, user-generated content, rivalries, ad companies didn't give a shit about that. They cared about eyeballs, engaged eyeballs. And the things we were saying, the things we were telling them, that's selling them on, scared them. They didn't want user-generated content. They didn't want social. This was all, of course, before all those things were cool. So we failed at that. And because we failed at that, the company failed. We didn't know how to bring our narrative to different perspectives. So what am I saying here? You might say, Brad, are you just telling me that I should be everything to everyone? That I should go out and totally change my story, totally twist the narrative based on who I'm talking to? Isn't that what politicians do? Well, yes, it is what politicians do. And they do it for a reason. And the good politicians, or those of whom exist, think about it in the context of a brand. They have a brand. What do I mean by brand? Well, when most people think about brand, they think about the logo. They think about a set of colors. They think about Google, multicolored, straightforward, minimalistic. The Google logo. Everyone knows the Google logo. But that's really the output, not the things that go into determining what a brand is. So what sits behind the Google logo that's minimalistic, colored almost like a children's toy? Well, the values of Google, the principles of Google sit behind that logo. So when you're thinking about brand and thinking about how you tie together all these different perspectives and the narratives that you have to build, when talking about your idea, you have to start by coming up with what your company's values are. What are you? And more importantly, what are you not? And that can be translated into a mission and vision for the company. You know, the 15-year vision I think Reese mentioned earlier, that's incredibly important. But how do you get to a 15-year vision? Well, you start by thinking about what your company is and what it isn't. And from there, you can translate that into narratives that speak to your various audiences. If Go Cross Campus had sat at a whiteboard very early on in our company's development and said, who are all of our stakeholders here? Who are all of the players that we need to convince to make this work? The users, the advertisers, the investors, ourselves, our team, and put all the things up on a whiteboard that those groups value, we would have probably had a different outcome, but we never did that. So Matt is going to talk a little bit about value proposition and specifically how we're thinking about that in the context of our latest venture, General Assembly.
Cool. So General Assembly is, and always has been, a somewhat complicated business. when we first started, after Go Across Campus failed, Brian and I both moved to New York. All through we started the last company in college, and so all through my college career, I was really anticipating, okay, so I'm starting this company, we raise some capital, build out a team, I'm going to graduate from college and go to work full-time as co-founder of my startup, right? Sounded like a great thing to do. And of course, that only works if the startup that you've co-founded actually exists. So by the time I graduated, we were winding the company down. That was no longer a viable option. But I started to get involved in the startup community in New York, started to go to a lot of events, meet a lot of interesting people. And at any one particular event or gathering or meetup or something like this, there'd be lots of great conversations, lots of really interesting people coming together, sharing ideas and feedback and making introductions, networking, et cetera, listening to interesting content. And then at the end of the night, everyone would go off and disperse back to their coffee shops or their apartments or kitchen tables made from doors or whatever it was. And I thought, what if we could create that kind of community, that kind of serendipity, that ecosystem, those sort of both social, intellectual, and professional interactions, not just once a month at an event or at a conference or at a particular meetup, but every single day in the same physical place. And the more people I talked to about this idea, which was very sort of unhoned at the time, the more people were interested, the more additional and related ideas I would get. We had startups who were interested in working out of such a space, having that physical space be their headquarters of where they actually built their company. We had people coming to us saying, oh, well, I'd love to host a hackathon or have an event or have my meetup at such a space. We had people who were based elsewhere and wanted a place to come in whenever they were in New York to meet with other entrepreneurs and have a sort of home base. And with that, with all these different ideas and all these different aspects, we also had people coming in saying, oh, they were a web developer, a designer, and they wanted to teach, right? They wanted to share knowledge. They wanted to teach other people their skills. Well, there's a lot of different aspects there. And when we really launched and created General Assembly, all of those aspects were part of what we were doing. We had workspace, we had a classroom where we were running classes, we had events, we had this community of early stage entrepreneurs who were there sort of based out of the physical space. We were producing some conferences. And it was actually very hard to describe what General Assembly was. Even as co-founders and other people involved, we each had our own way of telling the story. Even my mom had a difficult time explaining what I was actually doing in New York. And so what we realized is really the need to boil down everything that General Assembly was, everything that we were doing, everything that we were describing. Really cut off as much fat as we possibly could and really get produce a value proposition, which is a value proposition. The easiest way I can describe it is sort of what need are you solving and why? And ideally it should answer a sort of two-parted question. And the question is, what is it that you do? What is it your company does? What is the product fundamentally at its core? And why should people care? It should be one or two sentences long. It should be user-centric. It should be from the user's perspective. Time and time again, I'll hear pitches and see presentations from startups who are looking at a product from their own perspective. It's to start off with a whole list of features, and 5 or 10 minutes into the presentation, I still don't know why I should care. Why is this important? How is this valuable from a user's perspective? What's going to hook a user from the get-go and make them say, yes, this is important to me. This is something that I want, as opposed to just something that the founder thinks that other people might want. And that value proposition is really important. It's sort of the core message. It's the core idea. It's the core way of answering the why question in your business. And from that core value proposition, you can sort of describe General Assembly describe the company or message the company through different lenses depending on who you're talking to. So if you're talking to the press, make sure that you have that value proposition at the core, and then highlight different aspects or feature a certain aspect of it or talk about various elements. If you're talking to users, you might want to emphasize other aspects. But at the end of the day, you have to have that core value proposition that you can describe and tell people so that you're sort of grounded with a really key ideal that you're building the business on. A couple other aspects to talk about. Language and connotation really matters. We describe General Assembly, for example, as a campus. And that was a very, very important and conscious decision. We specifically did not use other language that's had certain other connotations. We like campus because it evoked this educational nature. It was this idea of people coming together. Even the name General Assembly has a double entendre to it, right? This idea of assembly meaning building things, creating things, putting things together to create new products, right? But then also this idea of assembly, of lots of people coming together for a common cause or a common gathering. And really, General Assembly, the business and the product, has very much both of those elements in it. And so in thinking about how we describe ourselves and what that value proposition was, it's very important to avoid cliches and really think about the language that is being used, because at the end of the day, you only have, as Brad said, a couple of seconds typically to hook a user and describe something to someone. And it's very important to have that first impression be a meaningful one that people care about. To finish off, I think another important aspect of this is once you define your value proposition, which you should do as early as you can. At the same time, despite that's the core to your business and then it should tie in very closely to your brand, it's still very important that can evolve. As your company grows, as you hire more people, as you evolve your product. Reese talked about having a 6-month roadmap but a 15-year vision, right? Well, that roadmap, 6 months after 6 months after 6 months, is going to be different. Your vision is going to evolve. The company is going to become something bigger. It's important that the value proposition is a sort of living document. So as you have important realizations and as you come across new user bases or new customers, and you continue to define and redefine what your company is, that value proposition should also evolve. It's sort of the magic is knowing what your core is, right? Knowing that value proposition is at the center of your business, but then also being able to, when you need to, evolve it and change it over time so that it can suit the future as opposed to suiting the present once the present becomes a few years in the past.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So before taking some questions from the audience, I would like to ask you one question. Sure. General Assembly is a startup, but it's not the typical web startup. It's physical, it's a campus. I wanted to know if you raised some money for that, and how did you pitch the startup, not to the end users, but to the investors?
Sure. Brad, you want to?
Sure. So General Assembly has raised $4.25 million. We raised it from a mix of people, including Howard Schultz's venture fund, Jeff Bezos, Yuri Milner, and about a half dozen others. A couple of things. The best way to message your company to investors is to be blowing the doors off and to be doing really well. And thankfully, I think we've gotten a great response from the community with what we've been doing at General Assembly. And we had a number of people coming to us and looking to invest. So I think once you're at that point, then it's really about having a vision for a larger company and recognizing that what you have can become the big win. And how you message that is very nuanced, because you don't want to seem like a crazy person, but you also it is important that you do communicate that 15-year vision. And honestly, the best way to balance those two things is to have paying customers.
Okay. Thanks. Are there any? I can't see the audience, but is there any question from the audience? Otherwise, I have another one. So as Ambassador Torrance said previously, Silicon Valley was not, built, but it was sort of grew up naturally from an previously ecosystem from Stanford, money and talent. It's not the same thing for New York. Definitely with General Assembly, you're doing a lot for the startup scene in New York. But what do you think the core elements for a city to become a startup hub? We had the city of Milan here. Mm-hmm. We had, at least. What do you think are the core points?
Matt?
Sure. So I think I know a number of speakers have been throwing around this idea of an ecosystem. I think that's really an important and good way to think about it. You have to have a number of different aspects in place that can help foster or catalyze a good startup community. I think some of those are, in no particular order, talent, and talent could be coming from people who are moving into the city. Talent could be coming from other industries that are have developers, designers, entrepreneurially minded people who are then coming out of those industries, and starting companies or getting into startups. Capital, of course. I mean, especially early stage startups typically will not be able to fund themselves based purely on revenue. In order to really achieve high growth and high success in a short amount of time, having capital at all stages, but from the seed, the Series A, the Series B, and up, is important and an important element of that ecosystem. Having a culture of openness, I think, and a culture that is okay with trial and error, with risk taking, with failure, and with supporting that, I think is very, very crucial. This notion that if you have a really great idea that you should keep it locked up and that you shouldn't tell anyone about it, I think if that exists within a particular community, it's going to fundamentally hurt the potential for that community to become a major startup hub. The more that entrepreneurs are sharing with each other, being very open, sharing best practices, being useful, making introductions, that kind of culture of openness, I think, is extremely critical. I also think a few other elements are media attention. One of the things that New York has benefited from, sort of by nature of being New York, is that there's already such a media hub. And a lot of innovation that's happening in New York in the startup sector, some of it actually is around new media anyway. So it's sort of like the media just looking into their backyard and saying, oh, look at all this cool stuff that's happening. But the more that there's an excitement and an energy and a vibrancy that the media oftentimes can provide and sort of shine a spotlight on the activity in the startup community, the more it's going to bring talent, the more it's going to bring capital, the more it's going to bring users and customers. And at the end of the day, there has to be a certain feedback loop in action. I think if you're to look at any recent growth of any startup hub, it's hard to pick out one thing and say, well, this did it. It's a sort of progress over time that builds off of itself.
Thanks. Any other question? No. Sandy is. Oops. I think we have some time issues. Can we take one? No.
Dieter? See? Okay.
Sorry.
What I was looking from you is if you have to say three things that you need when you organize something like the Foursquare Hackathon or something like that, three things that every one of us has to think that are the priority in organizing something like that, what would you say?
Community, community, and community.
Ooh, that was quick.
No, in reality, it's all about the ecosystem that you find yourself within and getting buy-in from that ecosystem. And one of the things that we think a lot about at General Assembly when we do things like the Foursquare Hackathon is what is our relationship with, say, the software developer community in New York? Because if we could never do the Foursquare Hackathon if we didn't have a great relationship with the average guy writing code at a startup or even a large company. If they don't have good perceptions of General Assembly, it doesn't help us at all, and actually we can never run something like the Foursquare Hackathon. If you have those relationships, you're golden. Everything else follows.
Thanks.
I have one for you guys. I've got a question against the wall over here. You might recognize this voice. So what they've done in New York has been phenomenal. The community that they've built has enabled us to really create an awesome ecosystem. We held a hackathon at General Assembly. My company did, brought in a bunch of hackers. Really key for the entire, community around video. So they've done an amazing job. So I'm wondering, is there anybody here in this audience who is really well connected, who wants to be the lead? I'm putting you guys on the spot too. Who wants to be the lead to open up General Assembly in Italy? maybe in Milan. If there's anybody, I'm challenging someone here who's excited and who knows a lot of developers. Yeah, that guy? All right. So after this chat, you guys are going to talk, and we're going to see if I can put them on the spot to get a General Assembly in Italy, because I think it would be huge for everyone here. There's no question. It's just a statement.
Thank you, Reese.
Thanks.
Thank you.